I'm Megan Kirk. I'm the Educational Art Technician of Print Media and the Chemical Darkrooms at the Alberta University of the Arts. We're making this video to talk to you today about how to set up your home studio. Your home studio is going to be one of the most important things to you because it's going to be your sanctuary of where you're making your work, where you're thinking about your best ideas, and just sort of your refuge for where you can go to be creative. Really what we're going to be going through is the 3 different tiers of the different studios that you can create at home. For each of these tiers, we're going to show you about safety, we're going to show you about cleanup, we're going to show you how to protect your surfaces, how to protect your floors, and how to protect yourself, and just generally making you feel as comfortable as you can to set up the best studio experience for you at your time at the university, but also for being an artist outside of the university. Your PPE is your personal protective equipment. So that's what's going to keep you safe while you're using a multitude of different materials, chemicals if you're in tier 3. It's really what you're going to need in your toolkit at all times through your entire art career, not just while you're taking classes with the university. So if you're not just having dedicated studio clothes or a uniform similar to which I'm wearing, the easiest way to move forward would be to choose an apron. Now I've got 2 aprons here. They look very, very similar, but the difference here is that I use this one for cooking. But if I'm using a cooking apron, I don't ever want that to come in contact with the art materials that I'll be using. If you decide you're gonna get really messy today and you wanna make a huge mess, you can buy something like coveralls. Now these aren't completely impermeable. They can actually get materials coming through them, but if you're just sort of making a huge mess, you're not too worried about the clothes underneath, but you do want some semblance of order, these will help you. The other important thing that you want in the studio, especially for your feet and making sure you're comfortable, but also for your safety, we really need to think about shoes. So try to find yourself something that can be your dedicated studio footwear, especially if you are prone to accidents like I am sometimes. We don't want to be traipsing our paint or anything else through the space. So when we put these on, it's part of that artist uniform. We know that we're going to be doing some dirty work. We know that we need that foot support, and that's why this is important. Your eyes are so important. You can always remake your artwork, you can't remake your eyes, so it's so important that you take care of them. I'm holding 3 different kinds of eyewear protection that you can use. Some are more heavy duty than others. Now I've got a multitude of gloves here and they kind of look like they'd all do the same thing. They cover my hands, right? Well, depending on what you're doing, this is why this would be really important. We have disposable gloves here. These are really great if you're doing any sort of dry pigment like a charcoal, anything that's going to make your hands really messy, then you can easily pull your hands out and then you're going to keep your paper clean. Next, I have 2 versions of grip gloves. So if you're doing a lot of sculpting, if you're just really clumsy and you let go of stuff a lot, these are going to help protect your hands when you're carrying larger objects or when you're just using a rougher sort of surface. These are just dish gloves. You've got pink and you've got green. I get it. Well, the pink and the yellow that you're most commonly used to seeing, this is what you'd find in Safeway. These are dish gloves. They will keep your hands dry. They are great for when you're using soap and water. That's sort of it. These green gloves, these are nitrile gloves. So the nitrile gloves are chemical resistant for a number of different chemicals that I won't list because you won't be using them at home, but these are your safest option and they're so affordable that I would say get these above these and then you know you're safe for everything. This is an N95 mask. It has a couple of straps that go around the back and it has a nose piece that you can clamp here to make sure it's form-fitting to your face. These are great. You can use them for a couple of uses in the home, but they are disposable. If you can, what you'd like to get yourself is a respirator. That will last you for years and years and years, but this is yours. You're gonna be doing a lot of sweating into this, a lot of spitting. It gets kind of gnarly. You don't really want to be sharing this with anybody in your home. So make sure that this is just yours and you keep it in your storage. There's different options and cartridges of what we can put onto the side here. The difference between these is this is for dust particulates. So if you're doing any sanding, maybe in jewelry, maybe in sculpture, maybe in ceramics, that's what you want this for. This is chemical particulates, both of which will fit onto your respirator. That's the general overview of PPE that'll keep you safe for all processes that you'll be doing in the university and your career beyond. Okay, so tier 1. I have roommates, I've got family, I've got pets, but this is the best that I can do. Thankfully, I've got a large kitchen area here. For some of you, it might be a smaller dining room table. That's totally fine. First thing you're gonna need that's really important is Mylar. You're gonna want a Mylar that's got a nice thick weight to it. A thinner Mylar and acetate simply won't do because they're not as durable. Next, we have brown craft paper. This also comes on the roll. It's got quite a thin profile, but you can layer it up if you want to cover the entire space. Here we have newsprint. So I'm going to tear off just a couple of sheets of newsprint. And the only reason why we're doing this is it gives it a little bit of a protection for the actual countertop itself, but sometimes it's nice just to work on a lighter surface depending on what your table is like, and that way you can bounce around the light when you're working with certain mediums. So what we've got here is we've got a black masking tape. It's got a little bit of zhuzh. It's the one I like the most. So we've got that. We've got the regular boring masking tape, or we've got painter's tape. I'm going to unroll my Mylar here. I've already cut it to the shape of my table. I'm just going to fix it into the place where I want it, making it flush with the edges and the corner. And just a few pieces all the way around the perimeter of the table or however you're working. Now we've got a nice water safe area. We can work with all sorts of different mediums. We can still clean it up. We're protecting the surface. It's also gonna make sure that when this is used for a food prep area later, that we've done our best due diligence to make sure that it's safe for everyone in the household. So we've got three options here for you. Some of these might look familiar as things that you have in your kitchen, or they're easily attainable items. So the first one that we have here is your regular run-of-the-mill stool, but it does have a fabric top on it. So that's gonna create some issues if you're doing any kind of wet work. You don't wanna accidentally be spilling on it. Certainly if it's the family stools and somebody's paid for it, you really don't wanna ruin it. So then this might be a better option for you. This stool here is completely hard surfaces. There's no way that anything can get absorbed into it, but it might not be the most comfortable thing for you to be sitting on while you're working on all of your projects. So if it is at all possible, getting something like this might work that much better for you. It does have a nice soft top on it. It is height adjustable, as well as it does have a really nice thick base on it, so that if you're really getting into what you're working on and you're tipping over and you're reaching for things, you don't actually have to worry about the stool itself tipping over and becoming unsafe for you. It's going to give you a lot more ergonomic comfort when you're working, and like I said, it is height adjustable, so depending on the surface that you're working with, or if you want to get detailed work and sort of shrink down to it, it will work for you. In Tier 1, storage is going to be a bit of an issue because we're in the kitchen. We can't necessarily be taking up all of the pots and pans areas, and we really need to be able to make sure that we're keeping our equipment and our supplies separate from the cooking utensils, especially if we're going to be using things that look really similar. If you can get something on wheels, of course that's going to be the best. If you can get a couple 5-gallon buckets, if you can get a tool chest, if you even just have some apple boxes, whatever it is that you have, you can make it work. We just want to make sure it's something that can be organized, that can be your studio space that you can roll out when you need it, and you can take it away when you're done with it for the day. In here, I went to the dollar store, found a bunch of bins. The most important thing here is labeling it. When you're getting into an art frenzy, this can get away from you so quickly. And so you really want to make sure that everything is properly labeled, so when you're throwing it back into your space, it's easily taken care of. So I've just got some paints, I've got brushes, markers here, I've got PPE, I've got a toolkit. So if there's any extra bits and pieces that you need, it's all right here accessible. Because when you're having that burst of idea, you don't want to have to dig through the rest of your space and find what you need to complete the project. Here it's all at your fingertips, and that's going to help you moving forward. So we've had a long day of safely making a mess with our PPE and our protected surfaces in Tier 1. Now it's time to clean up. I've got a little bit of a paint mess here, not such a big deal. Wet cleanup is great, but I'm a little bit far away from the sink. What do? Bring the sink to me. We've got two different buckets here. I've got a 4-liter pail and I've got a 2.5-gallon pail. Put a little bit of this in here. Don't have to tell you guys how to use soap. I'm pretty sure you got that figured out. But because we protected the surface earlier with plastic, even though I've got paint here that has dried down, I can really easily clean it up. Got a dedicated rag here from my studio space. gonna make sure that I've got this all taken care of. And then for actually doing any of the sort of painting that you're going to be doing here, just using a really easy like light sponge here with your soapy water and a nice little rinse, we're good to go. We can now easily put it back here and put it into our mobile storage, and we're going to be all cleaned up in no time. Now we're in tier 2. Tier 2 is obviously the next step up, but that just means that it's somewhere that you can set up a dedicated studio space. It's going to be somewhere that's separated from your regular living area and somewhere specifically where we're not going to be doing any kind of food preparation. So here we've upgraded from the stool to a slightly more comfortable ergonomic chair. I've got a nice swiveling height adjustable office chair. I got it on Kijiji. You don't need anything special. One thing I'd like to talk about in tier 2, and it's just as important for all tiers, but especially here, when you're going to be doing a lot of drawing, we use a lot of really fun dry materials, but they can be really detrimental for you when you're actually breathing them in. We really don't want to be sweeping these particulates into the air. So what we're going to do is here I've got a little bit of the mess on a page and a little bit of the mess on my protected surface already. This page, I could either funnel it and drop it down into a garbage, but really what's more safe is I sort of just create a little envelope for it. And then that way I know all of the particulates are in here and they don't even have a chance of getting out as I'm dropping it into the garbage. What I'm left with here, I'm going to want to do a wet mop with it. So I'm going to take my sponge bucket that I was using earlier, and I'm going to, with a really wet sponge, clean up as much of that particulate as I can. Once we get it all there, we're going to take one of our many rags that we have available and on hand, and we can properly clean up this surface, get all the moisture out of there so that we're cleaned up and ready to work on our next project. Proper lighting is super important for any of the processes that you're going to be doing. Sometimes when you're in the kitchen or when you're in that small shared space, you don't really have the opportunity to bring in an outside light source. In this space, I'm lucky. I've got a couple of windows, but also I've got a color correction bulb. This is something that's going to help become like anti-fatigue for your eyes. So if you're doing a lot of cross stitch, if you're doing really fine jewelry work, you're going to have a tendency to have very tired eyes, similar as you would if you're staring at your screen for too long every day. So this color correction bulbs are going to help you have greater detail and understanding for the work that you're doing, as well as to maintain your actual eye health. Your storage for tier 2 is just as important as tier 1. So all of the same containers we were using earlier, we're using here, just now we have places that we're going to put them where we don't have to wheel them away. So here I've got 2 different options. I've got the lockers in front of me, and I've got these ones to the back here. So I'm going to put away my storage. It's properly labeled. I've got room for everything that I'm working on, so nothing has to be left out. And I've got separate storage dedicated for all of my messy areas. So I'm going to put my rags away in my cleaning stuff area. Sometimes in tier 2, you might be in a spare bedroom. You might have access to really comfortable seating, and maybe you bought it for your studio, but you still want to protect the longevity of that item. Some of that fancy masking tape we were talking about earlier, and these 3 items, either on their own or in conjunction with one another, are going to help to protect these surfaces. This first item is available at the AUArts bookstore or any really maintenance store that you go to. This is just poly on the roll. It's really, really thin, but it is double-sided, double the width rather, so then you've got more bang for your buck. Having this draped over a surface of your furniture is going to protect it. It is a little bit of a thin membrane, so it will puncture, so it's not really a long-term solution, but it's certainly great in conjunction with a couple of the other things that I'm going to show you. The next option we could look at, it's maybe not as aesthetically pleasing, but everybody's got a couple laying around, is a camping tarp. So depending on the project that you're working on that day, this is a really great way to unravel it, drape it on the furniture, put it onto the floor. This is also something that's got a little bit more texture to it, so if you wanted to affix it to the floor in a more permanent nature, you could certainly do that. This is a heavyweight, I believe 10-ounce canvas that we sell at the bookstore. The nice thing about this is it is quite thick, it is durable, and it is absorbent. So if you're dropping paint onto this, it is going to stick. It's going to dry in faster and not be as much of a slip hazard as perhaps the other 2 options. That being said, it's not waterproof, so you will still need to perhaps layer some plastic underneath it, but this works well for really long-term floor protection in your studios. Between these 3 items, you should be able to keep yourself protected for all of the practices. Just make sure that every once in a while you peel up the corner and make sure that nothing's gone through underneath. Tier 2 doesn't just mean having a separated space from your living area, it also means having access to a mess sink. And by mess sink, we mean a sink that you can use that isn't used in your normal living area. So it's not in your kitchen, you're not preparing food there. Also, I'm going to talk a little bit about chemicals that you might already have in the home that are going to help you through your process. Now this one you might not have, but I suggest getting. We do sell it in the AUArts bookstore, and this is an orange-based pumice cleaner. So this is for your hands. So the pumice are these little particles. When you scrub your hands together really, really well, it takes off the mess super easy. So remember how charcoaled my hands were earlier? I used it once and it's almost completely gone. Next, dish soap. You've all seen this before. Any brand works really, really well. This is gonna help cut through grease. It's also gonna be a great next backup cleaner for your pumice cleaner. When we're thinking about oily substances that we might be using in our practice, so maybe you're doing oil painting, maybe you're working with oil-based inks for printmaking, oil cleans oil. So here we have canola oil. You don't necessarily need this much of it, but when you've got that oily mess, get your rags out, put a little bit of canola oil on it. It's gonna cut through it really, really well. Just make sure you use a number of rags to make sure you've cleaned up the majority of the oil spill. And to cut through that grease residue that's left behind, normally we would turn to something like Windex, but here you can make a cheap alternative using a little bit of your house vinegar with water. That is going to cut through all of that grease residue that you have left over. And lastly, a common household cleaner that does work for your really stubborn stains is Ajax or Comet or any of these abrasive based cleaners. So you just sprinkle a little bit on, use lots of water, scrub down the surface. It's gonna help pull those stubborn ink stains out, no problem. But it is abrasive. So it works really well on a melamine surface or on glass, depending on the actual tabletop that you have in your studio, this might be right for you. But if you are working in a tier 1 scenario, make sure you do a little bit of a spot test or ask somebody else in your household if this is the appropriate product. You made it to tier 3. So tier 3 is going to be a space that is completely separate from your living area, completely separate from where you're preparing any food. You don't have to share it with any pets, roommates, family, anything like that. You've got a permanent space where you can set up and make all of your artwork. Now, despite the fact that you're in a garage, that doesn't mean we're just going to trash the space. We still want to be really, really organized. We still want to take care to protect all of our surfaces. So all of the elements that we talked about in tier 1 and tier 2 apply here and then some. So you'll notice that I'm still working with a covered surface here. We've still got tarps and plastic that we can use to protect our floors. We're working with a concrete floor here, which is wonderful because then we can clean up really, really easily with a broom, with a mop, whatever we need. You really maybe want to invest in some nice tables. And by nice, I mean anything that you can do your process on. So I've got 2 folding tables here, one a little bit more sturdy, one I've got that's height adjustable that works really well for me. We still really want to think about the ergonomics of where you're sitting as well. So I've got a height adjustable office chair here that rotates, lets me roll around, but anything that's comfortable and works for you is perfect. We still really want to think too about our studio wear. So making sure that we have the proper PPE, where we've got some clothes that are specific to our studio here. We've got aprons available. We still have all of our goggles and our gloves, and we have everything really well organized and within arm's reach here. So all of the storage that we talked about earlier, I've got a very cheap solution here with the cinder blocks and wood. Everything is labeled properly. Everything is in bins available from cheap dollar stores. So there's really no excuse to not set yourself up for success with some really great organization right off the bat. Here in the garage, I'm lucky to have a window and I have the option of having a lot of good ventilation by opening the door. This is key for doing a lot of processes that we can't do in tier 1 or tier 2. Here I've got quite a bit of adequate lighting, but I can still bring in the color correction bulb that's going to help me do a lot of my processes. Really make the space your own. For me, I brought in some plants. Maybe you want to put up a picture of your favorite technician. Do something that makes the space inviting for you so that you want to spend your time here and really get as creative as you possibly can. So in tier 3, we're in a separated space from our living area. We have a lot of good ventilation. So here I am in a garage with the garage door open that allows me to do so many more processes. Maybe I'm working in some sort of sculpture or woodwork and I might be doing a little bit of sanding, I might be doing some sort of cutting, or I could be even working on my design projects. So maybe I'm using fixative on things, I'm using spray adhesive, maybe I'm using some spray paint for something. No matter what the process is, we now have the proper ventilation, but we still really want to protect ourselves. So make sure you're still using the proper PPE that we talked about earlier. So if you're sanding, if you're going to be cutting anything, you want to make sure that you're going to use a particulate filter for your respirator. If you're going to be doing any spray adhesives, if you're going to be doing any clear coating or any kind of spray painting, you want to make sure that you've got the chemical respirator attachment, and that way it's going to make sure it filters out all of those misted particulates. In tier 2 and tier 3, we talk about the necessity of having a mess sink, but not every garage is going to come with running water. So you can use a hose from your yard, maybe ask your neighbor if you don't have one, and then any of the buckets that we're talking about in tier 2 are going to work for you. If you're working on a larger project, go out and get one of these storage bins. It's going to work really well for you. Basically anything without a hole in it is going to be your new wash bucket. As long as you have no chemicals in the water in the buckets that you're using, you can just safely pour them out into the alley and dispose of the water easily that way. So we've covered tier 1. You're either in your kitchen or in your bedroom and you've got a mobile storage solution. Tier 2, you're in a spare room, maybe you're in your laundry room, you have access to a mess sink and you've got a slightly more dedicated space. Here I'm in tier 3, which is a permanent dedicated space that's completely separate from my living area. So talk to each other, talk to us, make your space your own, and we can't wait to see you in the studios as well as in your own home. Thank you so much for joining us on this, and we'll see you in the classroom.